Let me know when the stream's going. Oh, it's... Okay. Oh, yeah. Cool, I see. Jeez. You look great on YouTube, buddy. These cameras make you look great. Yeah, it's like they boost you a bit. Yeah. Hey, everybody on Zoom. We're gonna get going now. This is Lee Vinsel. I'm one of the organizers of the STS seminar this year with Sonia Schmidt and our grad assistant Oliver Shuey. Oliver is actually going to introduce our speaker today. I just wanted to say a few things of housekeeping about how this is going to work. On Zoom, your best experience is going to come if you go ahead and pin the Zoom stream called STS speaker. It's basically what people would be seeing on YouTube right now. So go ahead and pin that and you'll see everything that's happening here, including the shot of me in the room. So go ahead and do that. And for folks here in the room, when we ask questions, we want to come up to this microphone just so it gets captured nicely. Okay? And I think that's it. Oliver, you take it away. And be sure to unmute.
Am I going to the podium? Or
Yeah, go to the podium.
Okay, going to the podium, okay. Excellent. Awesome. Hello, everyone, and welcome. So I'm so excited to introduce Dr. Qin Zhu, who is an associate professor in the Department of Engineering Education at Virginia Tech. Though he originally studied materials processing and control engineering as an undergraduate, he earned a PhD in the philosophy of science and technology from Dalian University, as well as a PhD in engineering education from Purdue University. Prior to his appointments at Virginia Tech, Qin was a postdoctoral researcher as well as a faculty member in the Department of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences at the Colorado School of Mines. He is interested in understanding engineering cultures, values, and norms, and has written extensively on the importance of creating culturally competent engineering ethics education. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Qin Zhu.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Oliver. That was a really, really amazing introduction. I really appreciate that. Thanks very much also, Lee, for inviting me to this great event. I'm very excited to be here to see everybody here, but also interact with other colleagues over the Zoom. My background, a little bit again, it's I was trained as a materials engineer and then in philosophy of technology, and later in engineering education. So I was trained in many different ways. One of the things I always want to do is, when I was a graduate student, I was always amazed by STS scholarship. I'm not a STS scholar, but I can say that I'm definitely STS inspired. So today I want to share with you some of the thoughts I've been thinking based on some of the empirical research we have done in engineering education about how to teach engineering ethics. So the title of my talk today is basically from segmentation to integration to inspiration, comparing paradigms for teaching engineering ethics. So in this talk, I will compare I call the three paradigms I conceptualize. And then see, I will definitely need your feedback on the framework I'm constructing, and then give me some feedback, because this is a paper I'm working on for a journal special issue. So a little bit of introduction. Some sort of like a contextual knowledge here. Engineering ethics education in the U.S. And globally is a really important topic. But what I'm really thinking now we need to do a better job is to understand that sometimes we can be very passionate about teaching ethics to engineering students. However, we have to be really careful. Education, including ethics education, is not always is not always value neutral. Actually, it's never value neutral. Therefore, the way we teach our students will certainly have impacts on students. There's a book recently published looking at side effects of education. It's called What Works May Hurt by Professor Qin Zhu. And he actually talks a lot about some of the experiments in US history of education and looking at what some of these experiments, the initial purposes were trying to do one thing, but in fact generate several unintended side effects. I mean, that kind of thesis is not, is actually not foreign at all to people here in STS, right? The thesis, technology is not value neutral, is one of the central premises in the field of STS. So I wanted to borrow that to education, to engineering ethics education, more specifically to say that we're going to critically examine the ways we teach students about ethics in engineering programs. But the other thing I want to say is that we often, while we are tend to get very excited about teaching ethics to students in engineering, but at the same time, we often lack. The second thing we can learn from STS is that we often have this kind of lack of theorizing or theory for systematically examining the assumptions of engineering ethics education. In other words, why are we teaching ethics to engineering students? How do we do it in a more ethical way, for instance, right? So that's also part of what I'm doing today, is trying to not build a theory, but at least to have some kind of like critical theoretical understanding of the ongoing efforts in engineering ethics. So I borrowed the term paradigm. I guess everybody here is very familiar with, but here I use it in a really loose way. I use a way basically as a way to describe people often have, I would call some kind of way of viewing the world, right? We're from different backgrounds. The ways we become who we are certainly will have impact on the way we see the world, right? So I use it in a really general way to see there are several different ways engineering educators view engineering ethics education, basically. And behind that kind of approach, each of these approach, there are a set of like beliefs, norms, even psychologies, knowledges, right? Those kind of things are associated with each paradigm. As engineering educators, we want to make sure that we understand these underlying assumptions, norms, and cultures under each paradigm I will be presenting to you. Because if you not understand these different underlying norms, values, then we sometimes can either overlook the impact, sometimes can be negative impact of these pedagogies on students, or underestimate or overestimate the impacts on students. Therefore, our education projects will fail. All right, so now I'm going to introduce the first one. First paradigm is called segmentation. Let me put it this way. All the three paradigms all agree that ethics is important for our students. We all ought to teach students about ethics. That's the future of engineering education. So all the three paradigms, they agree that ethics is important. What's really differs these three different paradigms is I would call epistemological foundations of the three different paradigms. So the first paradigm, as you can tell from the name, is called segmentation. It basically argues that ethics is important, and yet ethics should be perceived as an independent area of knowledge that is separate from engineering. In other ways, engineering faculty themselves, if they hold this view, they will realize I'm going to respect the expertise of STS colleagues, philosophy colleagues, or sociologists, communication scholars. I don't really care who they are, but at least they are not engineers. That's a kind of like enterprise that belongs to them. So I will let them teach, because it's not that I dismiss them, it's that I respect their knowledge. It's an area of knowledge that I'm not familiar with. Therefore, I'm not qualified or prepared for teaching ethics. Then there's a conversation recently in our field talking about the idea of competence versus confidence within among engineering faculty. So engineering faculty, if they feel like they're not competent, therefore they lack the confidence to teach engineering students. Therefore they feel not engaged while they are not willing to. I will show you some examples. Then they feel they're not prepared, but also they feel not confident in communicating ethics to students, even though sometimes they are aware there are issues in the work they're doing. Sometimes they will just skipped. But that doesn't mean they don't care. It's just they feel like they're not prepared or they're not qualified. I would argue that that kind of like influence also historically came from the ways codes of ethics were constructed in a lot of engineering disciplines, because some of you probably are familiar many of these codes of ethics often have an article which is about engineers only practice with their own areas of competence. If you're not competent, if you're not trained in ethics or as a specific area of inquiry, then it's actually unethical if you teach students about ethics. So there is another component historically from how the codes of ethics were historically constructed. So here I will share with you some of the quotes from one actually from my own research, the other one from my colleagues' work. You will see we all did interviews with engineering faculty. Then engineering faculty realized they're not prepared, they're not trained in the social sciences. Like the first one, engineering faculty members they see themselves not really trained in the social sciences and liberal arts for the most part, so they lack the kind of nuanced understanding of how to bring ethics into the classroom. In other ways, they feel like they are being ethical, because if they are not trained competently in that area, it might be ethical for them to not teach students about ethics, right? And then, therefore, some faculty realizes they rarely actually discuss broader economic, social, and political issues because they think that it's not something they're trying to do, because they feel reluctant actually to bring these issues to students, because therefore, again, this kind of like competence issue then actually has been translated to the competence issue, the confidence issue, right? So they're not feel confident to do that. So in my own research, I look at not only US engineers, I look at Chinese engineering educators. I found the same phenomena. This quote actually is from an engineering educator, a scholar, who is actually an STS scholar in China, teaching engineering ethics, and he basically justifies why he's important for ethics education. He says, because STEM faculty often don't have sufficient knowledge in ethics. Many of them, they don't know what the concept ethics is. So when they teach engineering ethics later, their theoretical knowledge is unprepared. They don't know anything about basic ethical rules, principles, or theoretical frameworks. Therefore, they never read any ethics works. If that's the case, therefore, it's unethical for them to teach ethics to students, right? So this is a perspective from an STS scholar justifying why non-engineering faculty should be included in engineering ethics programs in the Chinese context. So there are other beliefs I have listed here under the paradigm of segmentation, such as ethics education should be outsourced to philosophers, social scientists, including STS scholars and other non-engineers. Could be legal scholars too. It depends on what field you are from. Engineering programs sometimes don't really care where you're from, as long as you're not engineering. But then but of course you bring your own training to the classroom, right? If you are trained as an STS scholar, you probably will teach engineering ethics in one way. If you're philosophers, you probably teach something quite different, or if you're a legal scholar, you mainly teach something quite different. It depends on what kind of background it is. You are instilling a kind of understanding, conceptualization of ethics within the students. Therefore, the students, when they go to other places, other classes, or their future career, that kind of impact will have, will certainly influence their everyday practice. So that's my point here. You'll see also ethics is often taught through standalone humanities and social science courses. They may not always, like I said, directly relevant to technology engineering ethics itself. because a lot of accreditation criteria in the US are often outcome-based. Therefore, when accreditation experts, they visit the campuses, what they do is to look at all these courses students are taking. Again, as long as they are not engineering, they will check all these boxes. It could be Shakespeare. Shakespeare could be counted as an ethics course. You could argue there are ethical considerations Shakespeare works, but that's a different story. When this mindset is translated to industry, you will notice that when the students are taking this mindset, oh, my professors basically tell me that ethics is a separate domain of knowledge, therefore I should ask for help from experts. When they become engineers, some of the evidence we have in our study have shown that and for some of the engineers in the industry, they will say, well, there are ethical issues if you identify in the workplace, don't address by yourself. These are important issues. You should always ask help from experts, which are often people working in the legal departments, or people working on the human resource departments, or more recently in DI offices in some of the companies. So you're not supposed to address these issues by yourself. There used to be a case, some of you probably may have seen in some of the textbooks. Let's say a company, an engineer working in a company, you travel to a different country where sometimes you will get large size gifts or which can be really expensive. So what you are supposed to do is to not take it for sure, but also ask your legal department or human resource department to take care of the communication with that company, not yourself. So that's another example to show that the engineers actually are taking this kind of advice from some of the guidelines in their company. Okay, so now I move to the second paradigm. Any questions so far? Okay, we can do this later for sure. So the first paradigm, remember, is this is ethics, this is engineering. We should respect the expertise of those humanities, social science faculty. It's a domain of inquiry that we engineers don't know, are not trained in. But the second approach, second paradigm basically says, oh, actually, ethics is more than just about the work that we should outsource to humanities and social sciences. Or in fact, some of the humanities and social science faculty, they realize we have to take ethics more seriously, right? More purposefully, more seriously, in a more engineering way, instead of just doing this black box approach, letting humanities and social science faculty take away these courses and do whatever they want. They can teach Shakespeare and to check the ethics box. Let's do it purposefully in an engineering way. So if we know that this particular course needs to have ethics component, let's do it in an engineering way, do it purposefully, craft a learning outcome, what exactly we want students to learn in this class, and then using engaged pedagogies, integrate back into the technical content. The belief here is that there is an absence of ethics in the engineering curriculum. That's a major challenge all the engineering educators need to address. That's absence, and sometimes you can connect with a kind of deficit model, which is that engineering students have to learn ethics explicitly, otherwise their behavior will become problematic in the future. I can share with you later if we have time. There were some of the reports published in the early 2000s talking about why it's useful to take ethics explicitly and seriously in the engineering curriculum. And there are a lot of things talking about every technological decision has ethical implications, therefore we need to integrate back. So the major goals here are to integrate ethics or reintegrate ethics back into the engineering curriculum because engineering faculty, for some reason, they have decontextualized engineering problems, ethics from decontextualize ethics from engineering problems for the convenience of teaching students to apply scientific principles. So now what engineering educators need to do is to integrate these important elements, ethics, social justice, politics, policy, back into the engineering curriculum. So there have been some of these methods invented by both engineers and philosophers, right? So in the U.S., if you look at engineering ethics in the U.S., there are typical ways at different levels. These are the most intensive standalone courses. These courses could be either in engineering curriculum or out of engineering curriculum, right? Could be like a course offered by STS department on social implications of technology or engineering. Could be AI ethics in the computer science program, right? So that's sort of like a I call most intense ethics learning. And then there's something in middle, which is, well, I don't really have the space in the curriculum. Maybe we can integrate ethics in I will use a term later, actually, I borrowed from medicine, is called dose. Like the slightly lower dose of ethics, which is ethics modules or ethics cases. In other words, you put these like modules embed into the courses, but without taking extra space in the curriculum. Arguably, a lot of people like that because it doesn't really generate any, you don't compete with the STS department, for instance, right? So the STS scholars would then actually work with these engineering faculty, integrate into the existing curriculum. Then you have this even much lower dose of lower dose of ethics is called micro-insertion. Instead of putting ethics modules or ethics cases, what if you just change one particular like technical problem, a technical assignment, to add one sentence or two sentences to add this ethical professional dimension? I will share with you one example. So people have invented all these different approaches, but what's really important, again, is this engineering mindset. It's really necessary to clearly define predetermined learning outcomes and then engineer them into the curriculum. That's people argue that that's more purposeful and also manageable, accessible than the segmentation paradigm, right? So therefore, often you will see that many of the approaches is often like I would call professional applied ethics. So students are often asked to apply certain ethical theories, frameworks, tools to solve and address particular ethical dilemmas, right? Because that's very similar to what they learn in engineering. Okay, so I put some of the comments here. Sorry, the font size is too small. But basically, these are some of the things we reflect on, are some of the broadly held assumptions about this kind of approach. We call this common sense approach, because this approach assumes that there is always clearly identifiable technology there. We will look at artificial intelligence in general, in particular, but you could apply to any kind of technology. There's a clearly identifiable technology here. The application of this technology has clearly identifiable consequences that can easily be translated into ethical concerns. And then if we are able to identify these ethical concerns, then they can be addressed and rectified once they are recognized. So these are three major beliefs we think are really important for this kind of approach. But sometimes it's way too evident, right? So you see a case there, in many of the textbooks, the idea is that, okay, so now you're gonna decide whether you will actually fabricate the data versus you sell your, basically you report your boss to the above manager. In other words, you either lose your job or hurt your reputation, right? Okay, so here's one example I want to share with you how philosophers can work with engineers to refine traditionally decontextualized problems, technical problems, to make it more socially and professionally relevant. So I give you maybe a minute or two, sorry we don't have a lot of time, and just quickly read the first case and the second scenario. The first scenario is more traditional, decontextualized technical question. And then the second one is a revised one that includes a professional and ethical dimension. So you will notice that both of them are quite technical, right? I don't know if anybody has noticed any difference in the second scenario. Advanced science department, yes, exactly. You involve multiple stakeholders and the power dynamic structure, yeah, yes.
So the power dynamic with you and your manager?
Yes, you and your manager, exactly. There's another, sorry, Oliver.
There's a lot more non-technical details.
It's yes, there's a lot of non-technical information here which would be considered traditionally unnecessary. Yes. So if you actually do calculation in the two different scenarios, especially in the second scenario, there is one more step you have to address, because you would actually get, because you are supposed to compare the two different technical solutions, and you will notice that if you only focus on, based on the cost-benefit analysis in engineering, you would actually pick this particular, let's say, you will pick, where are these two? You will pick the refrigerant 12, if you just look at it from a cost-benefit analysis. But the purpose here is that as an engineer, you should not put that, despite that from a cost-benefit analysis, it's cheaper. Because that one, even it's cheaper, it will generate more environmental harms. So that's basically what the learning goal is here, is this one of the major canons in the code of ethics is that everybody know, most people here probably know, is that engineers should always hold paramount safety, health, and welfare of the public, right? So you basically are teaching students that's always important, regardless of what. So this is one example to show that how a traditional technical problem can be revised to make something else, to make more socially relevant. So, here I also want to share with you another part of this is sometimes we are not only integrating ethics components into the engineering curriculum, sometimes we also have to integrate humanities and social science faculty into the engineering classroom. You see a lot of co-teaching efforts that have happened at many universities, although it's another story that some of the logistics could be really challenging. But here's one particular example I want to share here with you. Many of you probably are familiar with, is in the box. I can share with you this here. When I was many of you probably have had this experience. When I was a faculty member at Mainz, I also often received a lot of requests to give guest lectures in classes. At first, I was very excited. At first, I didn't exactly know why they just keep asking me to give talks to their students. Now, one of the reasons I noticed, later noticed that because the engineering faculty, they genuinely believe that canceling a class because they will be on travel is better than, is not as good, having someone like me teach an ethics lesson is better than this professor canceling this class because this professor would be on travel for NSF grant review or anything else, right? So I genuinely care about students' ethical development, therefore I realize, well, I need to integrate ethics into my classroom, but unfortunately, I don't have the space in the curriculum, and then I noticed that on this particular day, I'll be traveling for a conference or for a review panel, but then realize, why don't I just invite Qin to give a talk? I don't really care what that is, just to about ethics to students, and then students will learn at least something about ethics and nothing. In other words, the fundamental belief here is that I don't really care what ethics is here. I want to integrate ethics, do as much as I can into the engineering curriculum, but the belief here is that having some ethics is intrinsically better than not having it, no matter how ethics is taught. But to me, I think that's a dangerous belief. I give you some historical background if you look at the slide, the left-hand side, this is a magazine, it's called American Education, published in 1970s. Now, I found this interesting picture here with a dose of morality. So in fact, ethics integration as a paradigm, you could be dated as early as 1970s when people were excited about integrating different levels of ethics into the engineering curriculum. So the metaphor dose, the medical metaphor dose even started from that time. Now, my right-hand side, there is a report published by the National Academies. They did a national survey competition as well. So they invited submissions from all the engineering ethics programs across the country. They select a small portion of them, and including the book, they call these ethics integrations or best practices for ethics. They use a different ethics infusion, but that basically is the same thing. So here, my colleagues, Beth Rady, some of you probably know here, and Stevie Ray and me, we put together this paper, analyzed, in fact, the field of engineering education, people have how they use the term dose as a way to integrate different levels of ethics integration in engineering, right? So you have the micro dose. Micro dose is often, like I said earlier, by changing this technical problem slightly, but micro dose, often you have to do it more frequently in order to have like a medical effect, right? Then you have the second level, which is like infusion. You add like a case or like a module, those kind of things. But then you have the highest amount of dose of ethics, which is you create a course in the curriculum that's a large exposure, often used for in medical science for conditions resistant to lower doses. Or people feel like they need most of these ethics training. So we use the term called dosage from medical science to describe the efforts by the engineering educators. They try to integrate different levels, different amounts of ethics into the engineering curriculum. You will not be surprised next time if you talk to engineering educators, sometimes despite they didn't theoretically conceptualize it, you probably will hear that term dose sometime. Okay, so the last approach is I would call, or paradigm is called inspiration. It's a more recent effort. Here I feel hesitant to use the term revelation. I think in the US it has a religious background, but I would really appreciate if somebody give me another term for it. It's basically what I mean is remember the first approach is to see ethics and engineering are separate, right? The second approach is more proactive, saying, oh, we're gonna more proactively integrate ethics into the curriculum. The third paradigm is say, ethics is always there. It's always in engineering. Instead of letting someone else to integrate ethics, inject ethics into the curriculum, into the body, you actually always have viruses in your body. What we need to do is to have this kind of education to engineering students so that they are inspired to make visible the ethical implications closely associated with the technical decisions. So ethics, in other words, ethics constitutes an inherent element. So if there's no ethics, there's no technology, right? So it's an inherent element that has always existed, although it's not always be visible, or phenomenologically, it's not always ready for you to discover, right? Within engineering practice or engineering education. So major task for engineering educators sometimes is to serve as Socrates, right? Socrates, to having a conversation with engineering students to make the hidden ethics curriculum already existing in the everyday practice of engineering education more visible to students, maybe to themselves as well, right? So here I introduce a term called hidden ethics curriculum or hidden curriculum. Basically, I mean three things in the engineering curriculum. One is it refers to the pervasive but implicit values within engineering education. Here, sometimes people call it ethics messaging or ethics communication, and also structural injustices in higher education, but that have been translated to the engineering education system. And the third is moral learning is not always included in the formal curriculum. Therefore, we need to take a more holistic perspective looking at where students get moral learning experience, not only in the classroom, but also in other less formal or sometimes implicit components of the curriculum. Could be having a conversation with students in the cafeteria, or could be something like extracurriculum activities students have participated in, right? These are like informal, implicit components of the curriculum often are very difficult to measure or control. However, sometimes can be really powerful. Or could be non-technical, could be in the non-technical courses, but a faculty is sharing a story with students that also can communicate messages to students about ethics. So the goal here is about inspiration. Students are inspired through self-critical and collaborative ethical inquiry to uncover the ethical dimensions of their everyday work. It is okay that they talk with non-experts. That sounds like very STS, right? So I want to give you one example. This is a project I collaborate with one of my mentors, Dean Newsma, on this project, looking at the hidden curriculum of ethics. In other words, where are the places where students get to know about ethics or morality and engineering in addition to the formal curriculum. So there is one particular case we identified. This extracurriculum activity here is engineering students during the first year, they often go to orientations, right? And in order to get them excited about engineering, they use different activities. There's one particular activity happening at this university is to invite all the first year engineering students, they even haven't started very much, they don't really have a good understanding what engineering actually is, to an event which is to sign their names on this board, which has the code of ethics on it. And in order to attract the students, what's really happening is that if you sign your name on it, you get ice cream. Okay, so you go there, sign your name on it, you get ice cream, you feel excited about engineering. So here the point is that students then they got some reflection on it, right? Students reflect on the experience. When Dean Newsma, his team interviewed the student, one student basically said, if reflecting on where you got to know code of ethics or ethics, then students saying, oh, I don't really remember any ethics-related issues, but one thing I did remember is ice cream and ethics. So here's what this student said. They give me ice cream in case I had any ethical qualms. Just here you go. I remember signing it, like code of ethics. No, I remember they sat us down and read parts of it to us. We didn't actually have to read the whole thing, which was a little questionable, right? So students started to develop this kind of like critical attitude toward ethics education, right? That kind of experience was not from the classroom, was not from an engineering classroom, right? So it's from the extracurriculum activity. So therefore, ethics is always in their life, right? You don't have to integrate from outside into engineering. It's already there, even it's in their extracurriculum activity. So as faculty, what you can do is to help inspire students to be critical of all this different kind of experience in the engineering program, right? Rather than projecting some ethical frameworks on students. So here, that's a major point here, right? As kind of inspirational paradigm. Here's another example, again, from the same study. When again, students were asked where you learn about ethics, here's another example students remembered. I took one credit class that was nuclear engineering class. I think my first or second semester, and we had probably 6 or 7 different nuclear engineers. So these, again, remember the second paradigm we're talking about is integration paradigm. One of the pedagogies I didn't include there because I would think it's like less popular. Oh no, not less popular, but it's part of a larger category. Is that they often tend to remember I talked about integrating faculty in the classroom. Yeah, so sometimes they integrate people from industry into the classroom to integrate ethics as well. So in this case, they invited 6 or 7 different nuclear engineers come and talk to us about what they did to be an ethical engineer, right? So they would talk about a lot of things, right? How to address this and there's that. But one of the things they often get to know is that how you are supposed to address ethical issues in industry, which remember the first approach, segmentation, is that you should always outsource to human resources department. So all the 3 paradigms actually are connected together in this particular case. Anyway, so when they talk about nuclear technology or engineering, none of these engineers dealt with weapons, right? And there were always a couple people in the class. The students just were curious. They say, hey, could you make a nuclear bomb out of this? Or like, oh, how does that work? How could you make a nuclear bomb? The professors always just laugh and just say a couple of things about it, general knowledge, and then move on, right? This is from the aspirational paradigm. This is another example to show, in fact, it's another example to show that, you know, without teaching it, you are teaching ethics to students that you should never care about it, or I'm not confident for teaching about this, therefore let's not care about it, right? So again, you don't have to integrate ethics back into the curriculum. Ethics is already there, right? Okay, so here's a framework me and my colleagues, Ruth Snyder at Colorado School of Mines, have developed. We use the two different directions to construct this four quadrant model to basically say, no matter whether you integrate ethics into the curriculum or not, there's always ethics learning happening. Sometimes unintentional, sometimes intentional from the faculty perspective, but sometimes it's in an informal curriculum or formal curriculum. So it's a more of a holistic experience. No matter whether do it or not, how you do it, it's already happening, right? So like here I mentioned a couple already, the rewarding ice cream case. Sometimes you can see other examples here, like there's one particular, like the industry instructor with industry experience hearing students' ethical issues in the workplace are better to be addressed by human resources, like I mentioned earlier. It's more of like unintentional, but it's in the formal curriculum to show students, you know, when you see these ethical questions, you should always outsource to other departments. I have a couple of, I think I'm doing, I'll probably move a little bit faster. I have a couple of slides. Basically, the goal here is to show you some of the examples me and my colleagues have done trying to teach students about some of the ethical sensitivity here. So two quotes here I want to share with you. Basically, these are basically the basic statements we have, what this approach would actually look like. We will argue that taking seriously the inherent social technical nature of engineering, every time if you see a line is drawn to exclude social content from engineering, if you exclude social from technical, there's an always ethical claim lurks just beneath the surface. So it's a very, very complex system. If you're trying too hard, exclude social content, there's always ethics there. The second point is that rather than claiming that engineering has been decontextualized as argued by the integration paradigm or stripped of ethics, which now needs to be reintegrated, we could instead point to hidden curriculum as an ethical lesson about what is considered most important for engineering students to learn and to know, a lesson that is always already there to be learned if only it is acknowledged. So therefore, engineering faculty need to be aware of the power of hidden curriculum and make a good use of it to inspire our students. Here are a couple of examples I want to share with you. One is one class I was co-teaching with a computer scientist on ethics of human-robot interaction. One of the goals we are trying to do is to teach students about how to do responsible human-robot interaction research, right? So in order to do that, we realize it's really important to improve students' agency and their sensitivity in this context. Therefore, we designed this kind of like experimental approach, and we asked students to work in different groups, and students then would actually assume different roles, including researchers and participants, and also people who are controlling remotely these robots, for instance, right? So they play different roles, and then they reflect on their experience, how different designs of these human-robot interaction experiments would actually affect participants, for instance, right? So we use that as kind of example to show the ethics is inherently embedded in the decisions you make for these design decisions. Here's another tool we have used. It's invented by an STS scholar. His name is Eric Fisher. Many years ago, I was involved in his project. We used this protocol in the lab. Basically, his project was to embed 10, I think it was 10 or 12, I don't remember the exact number, humanists. These are graduate students from humanities and social sciences, embedded them into university-affiliated research labs. And then what these humanists were asked to do is to use this protocol to have some conversations with lab scientists and engineers to uncover the social dimensions of, ethical dimensions of the everyday technical decision making. So it starts with this iterative process. It starts with the opportunity. So you as a humanist or embedded humanist, you will actually start by asking the opportunity this engineer is facing and or a problem they are trying to address, right? Then you move to consideration. What considerations do we have? Some considerations could be social or technical or legal or policy, right? Those different, unpacking the considerations. Then you look at the alternatives. What are different ways you can address this problem, and what factors you need to consider, right? So through that kind of like dialogue, you help engineers and scientists unpack some of these socio-technical complexities in their decisions. And then you talk about the outcomes and how the outcomes will be evaluated and who will get to evaluate these outcomes, right? So you do this iteration process. I also used ethics autobiography in my class previously to help students build reflections on the nuances, how their everyday decision making could be connected to ethical implications. I guess we probably don't have time to elaborate on here, but this is my last one. So I want to express my gratitude to the colleagues who have inspired me on this topic, especially Rocky Clancy, Dean Newsma, Ruth Sneeder, Beth Rady, Stevie Ray, and Jessica Smith. And half of them are STS scholars at Mainz. And I appreciate the time I gave the talk here and to show how I've been inspired by STS. Yeah, thanks. Questions? Questions, comments?
There's a question from David Wynyard in Zoom, but it's kind of prefaced by it's a bit long. So I'm just wondering if David wants to go ahead and come on Zoom. If not, I can kind of try to give you the gist of it.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Oh, give me one second.
Yeah, I'm involved in teaching engineering, and I've been responsible for the final assessment of students' ethical reasoning in accordance with ABET accreditation requirements. And the interesting thing to me is that ABET has this ethical reasoning or ethical element in its accreditation criteria, but they don't really go beyond the learning outcome. It's kind of left to schools to decide how to do that and even what ethical reasoning is. And on the other hand, they're supposed to respect the missions of whatever school it is. But school administrators, they don't really want to get involved in the disciplinary accreditation matters. They just want the engineering department to take care of that. So what I see happening is that it's a requirement, but nobody really wants to take it on. So personally, I take it on, but I do it in kind of a vacuum. I wonder if you have any comments on the organizational issues that are associated with teaching and even defining what ethics is.
Yeah. So that's a really good question, actually. I like. Thanks so much, David. I'm trying to connect it back to the framework I'm presenting here, right? So I think in general, people who are involved in designing, assessing engineering ethics programs, they hold different paradigms. It's always important for them to make sure that they communicate very clearly what paradigm they're holding. Sometimes they are willing to do it, sometimes they're not willing to do it. But I think right now, if you look at the most dominant approach, I think it's the integration approach. It's for many different reasons. It's the most dominant one. So therefore, I think this is also coming back to what the integration paradigm really believes, right? Like, ethics is important. We lack ethics, therefore we have to integrate ethics back into the curriculum. Where do we find these people? Let's find experts who are like STS or philosophers, right? So many of the times, the schools may not always have STS departments, but many schools have philosophy departments. They will say, well, let's have this philosopher look at it. Philosophers really care about one thing. I don't know if you know, it's ethical theories, right? So they care about ethical theories. What's really important to philosophy is ethical reasoning. Ethical reasoning. That's one reason to explain why ethical reasoning from the philosophical side has become the most important competence as compared to other things like ethical reasoning, but also ethical sensitivity, ethical courage, ethical behavior, right? So ethical reasoning, because philosophers and psychologists, they support. So a second reason I think why it's the case is because there are not very many tools in our field to measure ethical competencies. And ethical reasoning, for some reason, is the easiest one to measure. So arguably, I think that argument is questionable, but people actually, a lot of these models are built on that, right? So they measure ethical reasoning. And because you have all these tools available there, therefore you use them to measure ethics, right? Because they are already in your hand. But I think everything has, go back to your question about the institutional structure. I think what's really happening is that everything has to go back to the fundamental belief and philosophy of EBIT accreditation. It's outcome-based. And if nobody is defining what the outcome actually is, and so every university is provided with freedom, with freedom, including academic freedom, decide what they want to do. You combine outcome-based. I only care about outcome, don't know the process. Therefore, we can be easier. And I respect every program, their freedom, autonomy. Imagine what will be happening. You do what you want. You check all the boxes. That's how I see it, right? And also, universities, they haven't figured out ways how to scale up some of the ethics training approaches. Therefore, they will say, well, as long as we check these boxes, that should be fine. And faculty are not motivated, they are not rewarded or motivated to even integrate ethics into their curriculum, given they have many other things to do. Yeah. So it's a long response. I don't know if I answer your question, but I have to chat with you later. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. I think it's an excellent topic, and looking at the ethics piece of this, to me, is kind of a subordinate problem to the entire accreditation game, as I call it.
Yes, exactly.
I think an STS examination of accreditation would be a wonderful thing. I'm kind of pondering those sorts of things now, but thank you very much for your thoughts and presentation, and I'll try to contact you offline here too. Thank you.
Okay, we have another question up in Nova, but if anyone is in person would like to get in, we can alternate. Matt, go for it. Come up here.
Oh, Matt.
I feel like I'm on a game show. Hey, and it feels very strange. Hey, Qin, we're thrilled to have you here. So I'm going to ask a hardball type question.
Okay.
Okay. Better? Okay.
Yeah.
So one thing I didn't hear you talk a lot about is either money or power, and they kind of came out a little bit in the one example you gave. But I'm curious how you perceive of your three models dealing with ideas of money and power, and then also how money and power shape the adoption of the three different models themselves.
That's an excellent question, Matt. Thank you so much. I have to be a little bit self-critical. The field I'm affiliated with, engineering education, we would benefit greatly if we have more connection with the STS department to really address the issue of power and money and the power of the market, for instance, right? Because we have been doing a great job in addressing individualistic level to me and some of the institutional level injustices, but much even broader structural social issues political economy issues we have never fully addressed. That's something I think we can learn very greatly, benefit greatly from STS scholars. One of my colleagues tried to do something on that. I encourage, if anybody is interested in the question that Matt just proposed, you should read Andrew Katz's paper on constructing a political economy for engineering education decisions. That's published in Studies in Engineering Education, which is also published, it's an open access journal published here at Virginia Tech. So anyway, so going back to your question, the money and power issue, I think that's a really, really difficult one. To me, I think the three different paradigms, there is always a kind of, I don't know even where to start this, but to me, I think, again, I need to do more research on how the curriculum in engineering is often influenced by, for instance, capital and industry, and to do more empirical research. But I think there are at least a couple of things I can say. One is thinking about who gets to determine what the curriculum would look like. Imagining a university is creating a new campus or new program on engineering. I'm not saying it's an innovation campus. So thinking about the curriculum development process and who gets to determine that part of curriculum, right? And even think about where the money is from to build that building or whatever, or that campus. That would definitely have lot of impact on the learning outcomes and the curriculum, where ethics is in the curriculum, who should be teaching it, how it should be taught, and some of the constraints from the accreditation as well. But that's one thing I at least I know. But there's another thing is we tend to invite a lot of we emphasize the industry and university collaboration by involving people from industry, and they're at least in the integration paradigm I share with you, is that their beliefs, those people who work in the industry, how they think about power, money, and ethics will influence our students. And when our students go to these job fairs and talking to those people from industry, they probably will get shocked. A lot of things they will have learned in their programs at school may not that important anymore. They may value different things than idealistic ethics, maybe. I know I didn't do a good job responding to your question, but that's a really, really good one.
Short question from the folks in Arlington is, can you say more about the ethics autobiography exercise?
Yes. So ethics autobiography can be done in a variety of different ways. In this paper in particular, we listed 4 different approaches. So ethics autobiography, for instance, I can show is not something created by engineering educators. In fact, it was first widely used by educators in other professions, including especially nursing, medicine, and those disciplines require a lot of and frequent interactions with people, and arguably I don't know if this is off track, but compared to nursing and medicine, in that sense, engineering is less professional. Because if you look at nursing and medicine, they need to go through a lot of training, really rigorous training. It's really relatively easier to find who they are. They often have to go through the clinical experience in order to become competent professionals. However, engineers don't really have that. I used to see a lot of engineers give me business cards. I ask about what your background is, they often told me literature. But their title has engineer in it. So engineer as a term is loosely defined in the US, but what I'm saying is that ethics autobiography, you could use it as a way when you students when go to their field study or go to factory. Basically, it's a way of reflecting on their everyday experience. So I often in a class I taught at Colorado School of Mines, we use it as a class project. So for every week students will get to we give them a prompt. Often would be 3 different parts. One part is share one piece of maybe one story that or one question, just one thing. It's because the ethics class, so it doesn't have to be related to technology or engineering. Just one question, one thing that you have found important to you or you feel frustrated about, right? So and then the second paragraph could be like doing some kind of analysis. What are some of the stakeholders and what's happening here and what are some of the consequences? What are the things you're considering? Then last part, actually, we teach students a little bit about, because it's the ethics class, we teach ethical theories, and can you use ethical theories to further analyze it? And then we ask students to keep tracking every like, I think it's every week you do a little bit journaling, and then eventually you present a whole paper. There are a lot of limitations with this approach, though. Like, if you look at some of the literature online, there are ethics issues associated with it, right? There are certain things students, they feel hesitant to share, and who gets access to this data, those kind of things. But we also, just this framework, we also use that asking students to do this kind of like autobiography, use it as a guideline, reflecting on the opportunities and questions they're considering, and using that as a protocol to write about their autobiography. So in summary, ethics biography, in this sense, you can do it in many different ways, but it's often like you have to do regularly, every maybe once a week or once 2 weeks or a month, keep reflecting on some of the issues that matter to you as a person. Rather than something that are not relevant to you, maybe some cases. So you want students to talk about something that are relevant to them, that matter to them, but again, sometimes it can generate some ethical issues as well. So if you are interested, you can look at this paper, and I have more details in that paper. There are some other guidelines, writing guidelines you can actually find online. Often you can find it in nursing programs. You can revise them to meet the needs of engineers or other professions. And the goal basically is to help students develop a critical attitude while making themselves familiarize with professional culture. Yeah.
Anyone in the room? Oh, yeah, please, Claire.
Thank you for your talk. I'm a student, graduate student in STS department. I know that engineering department also has a graduate program, right? It's a PhD granting department. So could you please share what your graduate students read and like what courses they take? Because they would be ideally like the people who would teach ethics, right, for engineers. So just curious.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yes, so my academic appointment is with the Department of Engineering Education. We have a doctoral program in the field, and here's some advertisement. So arguably, we have the largest group of people, faculty members in the country who do research on engineering ethics. We have 4 tenure track faculty who do engineering ethics. We have a research also with a research faculty member, research scientist. We have 5 faculty members doing that. And we do a variety of things, ranging from philosophical theories of ethics to cognitive, how students develop their moral reasoning, to policy regarding a particular technology like artificial intelligence, and to industry connections, and like looking at practicing engineers, how they make ethical decisions and how they develop their ethical competence and solve problems. So, but the program itself covers many different areas. Ethics is only a small portion of it. So students often take, we have a couple graduate students here, maybe they can speak for that as well. I came to the department last year, so I'm still learning the curriculum structure, but here are some of the courses students would you asked about courses they're taking, right? So there will be courses on the, I think, methods, research methods in engineering education, including quantitative and qualitative methods. And there will be a set of courses on issues in engineering education. What are some of the issues that are typical in engineering education? Ethics is one of them, but there are many others. There's a course that will introduce students to how to write and how to do research in engineering education. It's called disciplinary literacy. So you learn some of the fundamental knowledge about how to do research basically in the field, how to write research in the field. Then you have two other big components. One is the social sciences courses. You get some social sciences courses training that you have flexibility to determine which area you want to focus on. Then you take classes from other departments, including STS, probably some of students. And then you have the engineering courses as well, because we're in the engineering department. Therefore, you have to take how many courses again? How many? Like 12 credit hours from engineering departments to get enough engineering training. If you don't come with a master's in engineering. I don't know if these are maybe there are other professional development courses like seminar, like something like this, yeah.
I have a question from Fernanda Rosa on Zoom.
Okay.
First she says, thank you for this excellent presentation. And then she asks, how do you see the relationship between ethics and social justice?
Okay.
We know that engineers may be ethical, follow standards, and even though they may be engineering tools that cause harm to people, including the poor, BIPOC people from the global south, etc. So how do you see this challenge and this somewhat detachment between ethics and social justice?
That's an excellent question. Thank you so much, Fernanda. So I have to be honest. I think in the field of engineering education today, I know a few people are trying to connect ethics and social justice more, including my colleagues Justin Hess and Purdue University. They received a grant just a year ago, looking at how engineering educators, engineering faculty, they perceive the connection between ethics and social justice. I'm eager to learn what they have found. My general observation is that there is a disconnect between ethics and social justice in the field of engineering education. You can see it from many different ways, including the papers published on engineering ethics is mainly about individualistic ethical reasoning, right? If you only care about individualistic ethical reasoning, there are a lot of assumptions about that, right? Everybody is following this kind of like schema, psychological schemas, right? And you understand there's always different levels of moral development, right? Fundamentally, what's really trouble is the fundamental philosophy underlying the moral development theories in engineering ethics is, some of you probably know, is Kopernican or neo-Kopernican theory. That has been criticized by feminist philosophers, right? So it assumes that everybody follows the same kind of like moral development, so like a three-stage model, starting from pre-conventional, then conventional, post-conventional. So pre-conventional is something like a kid. The reason my daughter knows what's good, what's bad is because if she doesn't do good things, I will punish her. So it's like you want to avoid punishment. You don't really understand morality, right? The second level is more of like conventional. Oh, maybe I'm in high school. The reason I know I shouldn't do bad things is because if I do bad things, the police officer will arrest me. And then you are, the convention is basically respecting all different kinds of like rules, norms, authority in the society. And if I don't do it correctly, my teacher will not be happy. So I want to respect the authority of the teacher, police officer, and all of these like powerful institutions. The third level is that you developed basically intellectually you are above the college level, which is post-conventional. You recognize the reason why you want to be moral is because there are universalistic moral principles that everybody should comply with. These are arguably social justice principles. But if you look at the whole framework itself, it's very, very Western-centric. Very Western-centric, and therefore not enough criticism of the framework itself. How do you accept to include more diversity-related frameworks to the way ethics is assessed? I think the question here is, what's really troubled is the theoretical foundation of engineering ethics research in the United States is problematic, is very Western-centric, based on the assumption that students are individualistic, rational human beings, independent decision makers. I think that's the problem. As long as, before we can really criticize that, I don't see much hope that you can actually really integrate diversity more critical into the, but I do have to say that there are other colleagues who do community-based engagements. They have incorporated a lot of social justice frameworks, but not at the heart of the engineering ethics education research. Yeah.
So I have two in the room. Do you want to follow up on that theme, this theme? Yeah. So why don't we do Mummy then?
Yeah.
Hi, Qin. Thank you so much. That was such a great talk.
Thank you.
And it actually helped me put some experiences in the bins, in your paradigms. I wanted to ask a little bit, because earlier today, and this might be a difficult question, we were both at Juan Lucena's talk.
Juan's talk, yes. Yeah.
Right? And he was bringing up a lot of the pedagogy of the oppressed by Paulo Freire, and thinking through what STS and critical praxis looks like.
Yes.
And I was wondering, I know you've just talked about how engineering ethics has this very Western individualistic centered bias.
Yes.
Yet, this was also at the Colorado School of Mines, this kind of education program. How do you see that fitting into your framework? Or how would we think about these two similar projects of trying to think about ethical education of engineers, but it seems in kind of different kinds of ways together? And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about how to think about these two projects together. And I don't know if you've had time since we just had the talk this morning, but I'm curious.
That's an excellent point. Well, if you look at the three different paradigms, people hold these different beliefs, they will respond differently, right? If you look at segmentation, they will say, yes, that's, social justice issue is really important. I'm not going to include in my class. You take classes from STS, right? Or from political science department or international studies. Then the integration part, they will say, well, yes, it's important. Let's, if I teach something about, addressing issues related to, like, let's say, electronic wastes, right? So maybe I can include one module or a couple modules on the social justice issues in Latin America or other, other non-Western contexts. And the inspiration part probably would be closer to what Juan proposed in the morning, is to really to cultivate kind of like a reflexivity among our students while they are doing their everyday work. I think. But again, going back to the current landscape, maybe I tend to oversimplify what people think in the field, but I do feel a little worried that the fundamental, we're not so critical of the fundamental epistemological, methodological foundations of the field of engineering ethics education. I'm not talking about engineering education in general, I'm talking about engineering ethics education research as a subfield of engineering education. A lot of my colleagues in engineering education, they have addressed diversity issues, and in community-based, like one in the community-engaged research, they have done a lot of work to challenge the dominant paradigms, the Western-centric paradigms, and cultivate students' critical attitude. But I'm talking about the engineering ethics education research, a smaller field that hasn't done much connection with other colleagues, because I think the problem is most people working in the field of engineering ethics education as a subfield of engineering education often come from 3 different disciplines: philosophy, engineering, and psychology, right? So if you look at all 3 of them, there's one thing that is common, is that they all care about individualistic philosophies, assumptions, yeah. Structural, macro, too messy, not easy to address, to measure.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. I don't think you remember me, but we met during Gary Downey's retirement.
Yes, I do remember you, yes.
So, I have a question, but the question might come in a very garbled form,
Okay.
and it might be irrelevant, but I still want to ask you.
Yeah.
So I want to understand what ethics is,
Okay.
actually. And you are saying that like ethics is already there in engineering education, right? So I actually want to ask you like how ethical considerations might come into conflict, especially in big science projects where scientists and engineers work collaboratively.
Okay. I'm trying to process.
Okay.
So ethical considerations, yeah. I think you asked 2 questions. One is, what is ethics? The second question is how to contextualize ethical considerations in the context of collaboration between scientists and engineers in large projects.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I need more elaboration on the second question. Like, what do you mean by the large? Can you give me maybe a couple examples of large science projects? Yeah.
Like for instance, like project like Lego projects or any other kind of like gravitational wave physics kind of like kind of experiments in like physics experiments where like engineers, they use a lot of tools, and engineers are required to help them with those projects. So if I was like trying to think if there is a link between the ethics in engineers and what kind of ethics the people do in the scientific fields.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That's a good one. It's difficult.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll give it a try. So first one is, what is ethics? That's a difficult one as well. People have different, like I said, from different paradigms, people will give different responses to what ethics is. But my understanding is that ethics could be defined in 2 different ways, right? Very general. One way is to understand ethics as ethical principles, values, right? This is more of like, to me, the Western-centric. How do you say stealing is wrong, right? You need to come up with some kind of ethical reasoning or principle, right? Like, it's because either the act itself is wrong because it's against your rationality as a human being, because if everybody steals it, it's just not logical because the world will be short of things to be stolen. No, this is serious. This is serious reasoning. It's Kant, right? It's Kant. Yeah, this is serious. Or consequentialism, right? You need to come up with like a, ethical principle there, then you applied it, right? So that's that. The other one is more of like much richer, I would say, often social scientists, behavioral scientists, they're trying to understand ethics from a more moral, human morality perspective, understanding the communications of meaning or creation of meaning or just relationship, right? Those kind of things, power, right? Those could also be connected to like everyday, like how do you make sense of this thing called good in your everyday interaction with others, right? This is more culturally relevant than this. The first one is logically relevant. Second, I don't know if I answer your question. So you have the two different approaches, but we have other ways, right? Philosophers call, okay, you have meta ethics, normative ethics, then you have like, you know, applied ethics, but that's less interesting to me. But the second part is how do you deal with ethics in scientific research, right? Or that's something actually very unfortunate in the US. When people talk about ethics in scientific research, you tend to lose that rich like dynamics, that part, because ethics of scientific research in the US is often use this paradigm called responsible conduct research. Like is about whether you fabricate data or not, whether you being honest reporting your data, whether you you treat your subjects objectively, responsibly. If you work on like some of the science projects that have no humans involved, you probably would be exempt from scientific training. Like let's say geophysicists, when they work on rocks, you're not working with humans. Why? There's no ethics in it, because if you're not working with human subjects, there's no ethics. Nobody will be harmed. Only rocks will be harmed. Rocks cannot give informed consent to rocks. Therefore, we don't have to worry about that part of ethics, right? As long as we are ethical, then everybody will be ethical, right? Because no humans will be harmed, right? This kind of idea, if no humans will be harmed, then there's no ethics. It's very central to a lot of scientific practice. Ethics, but also other researchers have talked about this kind of idea called what is called the science or technology as social experimentation. Like instead of treating, even looking at the sort of like the lab itself as a place where you have ethical issues, but the science is treating the world as a site for experiment. Then expand traditional research ethics to include a lot of considerations like social justice and who will be harmed, who will benefit from this, what this project is serving, right? It's doing treating the world as a experimentation. I don't know if I answer your question, maybe not.
I don't think I formulated the question very well.
But here's another thing. There is some ST scholars have done work on the negotiation and also they look at how scientists in the labs they constructed the concept of responsibility or responsible innovation. You could actually look at that, you know, like through their everyday practice, how they define it, how to process, how to relate their everyday practice to broader policy and social dimensions. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, we can talk more about that. Yeah.
Oh, yay. So I have two questions for you, and they go in different directions, but you can pick one. Sorry, I'm short. So first, I would like to hear more about the sort of positive hidden curriculum, which is often a term used to signal the ways that negative value systems are perpetuated in medical education. So, for example, like the hidden curriculum explains how one becomes sexist, racist, ageist, and ableist in clinical encounters and outside of the classroom. So this is question number one. Can you tell me about this positive hidden curriculum? Number two, how do you think using something like cultural humility instead of cultural competence would reshape the paradigm and system you have shown us so far?
Culture.
Humility.
Humility.
Yeah.
Okay. Then cultural competence.
Yeah.
I see. If you don't mind, could you elaborate on that a little bit? Like cultural humility, what do you mean by that? I know cultural competence. Yeah.
Yeah. So like kind of working instead of with the assumption that you can actually like comprehend other cultures, that it's kind of incomprehensible, and that you need to approach other cultures with humility.
Yeah.
Right. That's a loose definition.
Oh, no, yeah. That's, that's very helpful, yes. Yeah, maybe I can start with the second one. I think cultural humility and cultural competence, there's a difference between the two, I guess. To me, again, forgive me if I'm wrong on this, cultural humility is very much focused on the attitude, disposition, right? Tendency, right? You hold while you are interacting with a different culture. Now, cultural competency has a specific meaning in the field of education or engineering education, is that it covers 3 different components. It assumes that in order to be competent or in a culture, you need certain knowledge. You understand what the culture is and the skills, how to interact with people in that culture. And the third part is dispositions, which is the kind of attitude or sort of like a sensitivity in order to appreciate the culture that is different from yours. I guess what maybe you are asking is the signaling, maybe the messaging from the use of different words. Yeah, from that point, I think it's better probably use something different than the cultural competence. Something like you're sending a message to people that I can understand that.
Yeah, and
you know.
cultural competence, I think, also is like underpinning the deficit model in your paradigm.
Yes.
Right, and so if you use a different sort of tool to look at what's happening, like cultural humility, can you get away from the deficit model, right? Because all 3 of your paradigms are actually deficit model. You just get to the third, and you said, no, we found where the deficit is. It's over here, right?
Yeah.
The hidden curriculum.
Yeah.
So can you use another term to get away from the deficit model? Is what I'm really asking.
Yeah. I think the cultural humility might be useful in this sense. I agree. It can be hard though. It's because for some reason I think every time we do education we also assume that a lot of people criticize that the deficit model, but at the same time sometimes we are considered that students they need to learn something that they don't know. I know. To me, there's a dilemma there, but I think definitely it's really important. The other question.
Tell me more about how you saw this hidden curriculum.
Oh, positive.
Full of positive values.
Positive values.
How practitioners see it.
How practitioners see it. I think I had a conversation with Dean Newsman the other day about how to make the power of hidden curriculum work for engineering education. I think that's what you probably related to a question is how to make positive impacts of hidden curriculum rather than the negative.
Right.
Yes. So I think one of the things is that to really, at least one of the things we can do is to motivate students to empower. No, I hate to use the term empower. I think that also say something deficit, right? Empower. That's problematic. To really, I have to be really careful about the words I'm using. So the students have to develop some kind of like to develop some kind of like maybe competence or I mean different term will be humility. While they are, or some kind of like even expertise, let me put it this way, expertise, when they are situated in the ice cream scenario, right? Signing these names on the board, what should they do? Can we use it as a moment to teach students about critical attitude toward the rhetorics used in engineering education? Maybe that's one way I can think of, or turn these negative aspects of hidden curriculum into something, maybe learning moments for students to have some positive, to become critical of the problems in the system. maybe that's something I can think of. But certainly there are other ways of doing it is to create some positive learning moments, like we have tried in the robot ethics class, the experimental approach maybe. Yeah. Okay.
Sadly, I have to cut it off there.
Okay.
Thank you so much. That was really good.
That's